Om Yam Brahman Vendarudra Marutaha Stunbanti Davoy Vedai Sangha Pada Kramu Upanishadoi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyandavashtita Tadgatena Manasha Pashanti Yam Yogino Yashantam Naviduhu Sura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Our eternal salutations to that one who is the truth of life and existence, and whom the seers call by various names. Our eternal salutations to that one whose glories are sung in the different religious traditions of the world, but whose infinite and undying grandeur no mortal mind can comprehend. Our eternal salutations to that one upon whom the devotees meditate in the shrine of their hearts, realizing an ineffable presence in their deepest contemplations. May he prompt our minds toward the path of truth and righteousness. May she reveal herself into our souls and dispel the gloom of death, fear, doubt, and darkness. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Nicho Nichanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vidadati Kamam Tamatmastam Yenu Pashanti Diraha Tesham Shanti Shashvati Netaresham. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. That one, the eternal among non-eternal things, the intelligence of the most intelligent ones, who, though ever one, nevertheless fulfills the desires of the devotees. That one, the wise ones realize, is dwelling in their own self. To them belong peace and to none else. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karva Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvesho Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. On this particular Sunday, which is the 1st of December, we meet for our 4th class in this series of Shakta Advaita Vada. Vada means path, Advaita means non-duality, and Shakta is referring to Shakti, or the Divine Mother of the Universe. So put those together and you have the non-dual path as is witnessed and transmitted via the Divine Mother of the Universe and her precious spiritual children, particularly coming from the avatars and the seers and the acharyas, the gurus, that steep themselves in that path very deeply, lifetime after lifetime if need be, till they get there. Emancipation, what we're going to talk about today, their spiritual emancipation called moksha or mukti. And then they will use that Jivan Mukti state, living liberated state, to come amongst the struggling souls and help raise them out of the illusion of finitude so they can realize their true nature and join Jesus and Buddha and Gauranga and Gautama and other great souls in a divine celebration of eternal perfection that exists within that Atman, or Buddha nature, as we call it, every soul. And we've been sort of taking a guided tour of Mother's atmospheres, lokas, peripheries, dharmic areas, akashas, if you will, or spaces of wisdom that exist. It's like intelligence exists in every cell. That supreme intelligence exists in every one of these facets of Divine Mother reality. We've been using this chart on your left for the last 4 classes. It'll be our main chart because it is well decked out. She is well decked out with all of the wonderful facets of her reality, which sometimes the song sings. She doesn't even know the extent of her own wisdom, her own divine attributes. But there are at least as many as could be crowded onto an 8x11 chart and still leave her showing. Usually it's the Maya that covers her, but here in this chart you see her wisdom teachings are covering her. And that's a better covering. That's called Prakasha Shakti. That is a revelatory power, whereas Vikshepa Shakti is a distorting power and Avarana Shakti is an obscuring power. So sometimes truth, facts, Dharma, those kinds of things get completely obliterated from the view of the human mind. And other times they just get distorted and they begin to get misinterpreted and interpolated and so forth, and seem to be other than what they really are. But when the revelatory power comes out, called Prakasha Shakti, there's that word Akasha again with Prakasha in front of it, then we see that we're looking straight at the facets of her dharmic teachings, and she has an innumerable amount of them. Hopefully sometime today we're going to get to some of the darshanas, which are astika and nastika, shown on these 2 pillars on either side. But in the last 3 classes we have taken some teachings on Brahman, which is of course the non-dual reality. Then we've taken some teachings on the word, Om and Hrim. The bijam for Brahman is Om, that's the Father's bijam, Almighty Father's bijam. And Hrim is the divine Shakti bijam, at least one of them. She has many, but that's the one that is particularly in accord with spiritual transformation, when people want to work on themselves in internal work and begin to refine their mental facilities, intelligence and ego and the thoughts. Then they're going to want to focus in on that special bijam called Hrim, because that's got transforming power in it. So that's a particularly powerful bijam of hers. Bijam means seed. And we also looked at the connection of Brahman with Atman. As you see that on her crown, Brahman above her crown, Atman right in the center of her crown. And those two are sometimes puzzling to people. Why doesn't it just call it one thing? Why is there this Brahman and then there's this Atman? That's to explain the power of projection or obscuration that we were just talking about, that is Maya, or Avarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. Basically, why did Atman forget itself? Because of these obscuring powers. You see them listed here actually at the lower left-hand pillar. Prakasha, the revelatory power, Vikshepa, the distorting power, and Avarana, the obscuring power. And so why does Atman forget itself as Brahman? Why does the human soul forget that it's divine? Because of these obscuring powers, in part, and then, of course, other obscurations that come in that train from the original avidya, or ignorance of one's true nature. In yoga and in Vedanta both, they pretty much concur that avidya, or knowledge of one's true nature, is the first of all hells, and then all other hells will come flowing out of that, deeper and darker hells. Tundra Misra, they're called, and so forth. So if one can instead seek vidya, instead of fall into the hypnotism of avidya, then one gets higher wisdom. Vidya is higher wisdom. Vidyamaya, she's full of wisdom. So in that regard, the pillars there are showing us the Astika and Nastika systems on either side, which we will get to today, and also something that we are going to look at, Nirguna and Saguna Brahman. But as far as the Brahman and Atman connection, Atman gets covered by those 5 sheaths. They're called upadis. First the body, of course that's the last one to come, but from outside in, the body, and then it gets covered by the prana, and it gets covered by mind, and then it gets covered by intellect, the sheath of intellect, and then it gets covered by the ego, which is the subtlemost of all of them. So those 5 sheaths, Adara system it's sometimes called, are the way in which Vedanta would explain how mankind forgets its true nature in accord with the veiling power of Maya. So it's all a matter then of seeing through the 5 sheaths, and then Atman becomes one with Brahman. We've used the analogy before of putting 5 jars inside of each other, each filled with water, and then putting them all into the ocean, all capped off. So in that way, you have these 5 coverings, from causal to subtle to gross, superimposing themselves over the water inside of each of those jars and separating the water from each of those jars from the ocean. When those separations are taken away, then water becomes one with water, and that was always the case, actually. It was just the covering power called false superimposition, or vivarta, was there, and so Atman was maybe considering itself to be Jivatman, I'm an embodied soul, or maybe it was so forgetful that it just called itself Jiva, the body. Deha would be the more proper word. So stripping off those coverings from reality, usually best through meditation, is a way of making the Atman one with Brahman. It is always one with Brahman, but it's got those subtle obscurations in its view, and you can see the problem. If it begins to believe in these coverings as being real, then it forgets the reality within itself, and therefore avidya, or forgetfulness of one's true nature. And people are walking around in that state all the time. Most of the percentage of humanity is falling under the hypnotism of the 5 sheaths in Maya, which is another way of saying covering power and distorting power. So there we talked about the Brahman and Atman connection earlier. Then we also looked at Viveka and Vairagya. We talked about those last week, and we were headed for talking about the Satsampati, the 6 jewels, which we will have a chart for in one of these forthcoming classes. But today I'd like to, because we finished with this pillar at its top, Kaivalya, last time. Kaivalya means penultimate samadhi. It's the freedom of the soul from form, from nature. And we looked at a chart in which Patanjali, the father of yoga, explained the 7 steps to Kaivalya, if you remember. And finally ending in asampragata samadhi, which is right there, Nirvikalpa or asampragata samadhi. That's attained when the soul can finally make isolate itself from the idea that it's a form. And as I said, that's with these 5 sheaths covering, and with nature and all of the different forms that it lives amidst, it's very easy to get hypnotized away, or to become forgetful of one's nature as divine. Further one gets away from that realization, and the more Maya is thicker and very difficult to penetrate through that, and the mind gets distracted and gets distorted. So that's why great souls keep themselves at an even keel with sadhana. They keep their mind at the very source of the river, the ocean of Brahman, and so they can always see their true nature, even here amidst form. So Kaivalya then is a very good Sanskrit word for penultimate realization. It is that last stage where the soul will finally see that it's different than nature, that it's actually formless and that forms are just borrowed or taken on or assumed. That's why I had the oil and the water mixed last week, and I showed you that experiment where oil and water seems to mix, but it doesn't. And then it separates itself into two. Well, that's a good illustration of how when the soul reaches its penultimate position, it will decide to taste what it's like to be formless. And that's called samadhi of various kinds. It gets hints of those samadhis, and I have a chart to show you today about that too. It has the samadhi of knowledge, and then it has the samadhi of peace, and the samadhi of bliss, and the samadhi of supreme ego, and so forth. These are all sampragata samadhis. It's the word there on the other side of the pillar, or savikalpa samadhi. So all of these words you see there, nirvikalpa, savikalpa, is the Vedantic way of saying ultimate samadhi and penultimate samadhis. And in yogic way is asampragata and sampragata. Those words actually mean seated and unseated samadhis. So there are still seeds of thoughts and so forth in the sampragata samadhi. Seeds of thought, like seeds of wisdom and various teachings and so forth, and scriptures are still very much in the mind, and they act as a propeller, sort of some sort of propulsion to get it towards a sampragata samadhi. Same here with nirguna and saguna. That is, nirguna means free of all attributes, and saguna means invested with attributes. So those are three different words used at three different philosophies and different periods in India's history, scriptural and spiritual history, that showed us they were always thinking about form and formlessness, and that form was always considered to be something to be deified and used in order to one can work oneself into a state of formless samadhi. So we'll look at some of the charts today if we get to them in accordance with those. But on the other side of this pillar, which is moksha and mukti, so we wanted to bring forward this chart again from Shankara, the true meaning of moksha and mukti, and give that a little bit of a study so that we sort of complete the top part of this chart, sort of a great crown of all the highest teachings that Divine Mother has to offer us in this Shakta Advaita path. Now, there's a quote from the Avadhuta Gita to start it all off. The soul is not purified by six-limbed yoga, nor is it made pure by the destruction of the mind's waves. Neither is it rendered pure by bowing at the Guru's feet. The soul is pure by its very nature. So you cannot make this Atman pure because it's pure by its very nature. So if you enter into sadhana, or spiritual practice, which is also shown here on her august form, right here on her flower lay, if you enter into sadhana, then you should enter into it with the knowledge of Advaita, Shakta Advaita Vada, that your Guru or Divine Mother of the Universe is telling you that your soul is pure and perfect, and that's the Atman, and that it's not subject to birth and death or to imperfections and inconsistencies as disease and transformations. It's always aparinama, not parinama. So it's always ajati vada, not jati. It's always unborn, so it doesn't go through transformations. So with a quote like that from the Avadhuta Gita, which is a very strict non-dual scripture, we find that practice, spiritual practice like sadhana in the six-limbed yoga, and the chitta vrittis that you're trying to render quiet, that is, the waves of your mind. We were talking about those this morning in satsang here in this room at 7:15 at live streaming satsang this morning. These various vrittis in your mind, those are both of the brain, you see, the brain-mind complex. So you're working on that, you're not working on the soul when you are doing sadhana. And bowing at the Guru's feet also will get you some grace. Maybe if you have a Guru that's a Sadguru, like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, then some very powerful transformation might take place for you. But in most cases, usually get some blessing and some grace by doing that, but that you're supposed to take those blessings and go and perfect yourself, that is, perfect your body-mind mechanism. Now we know the body is not really perfectible. Good health is desirable. That's about what can be said for it, but you don't want to get caught into occult powers like longevity and those sorts of things. You just want to keep the body healthy and give it barely its due. That's advice from him, Shankara, and he should know because he only lived to 32 years of age. So he wasn't interested in longevity. He was pretty much in no other scriptures by the time he was 8, and was already teaching graybeards when he was in his early teens. So he was a soul that came to us in a state of recognition of that perfect nature that was within Atman. So he was a Jivan Mukta, at least. Sometimes they call him Avatar even. He lived around 700 AD or so, and he was the student of Gaudapada, the great Advaitist, who did the famous commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. So this is what he says here. Soul is not made purified by the six-limb yoga. It means everything from asana to pranayam to pratyahara to dharana to dhyan to samadhi. That's the 6 limbs, the upper 6 limbs of yoga. So you're working on something else then, aren't you? When you're working on asana, working on your posture, and then you're working on your prana, and then you're working on your mind and intellect complex, and then finally you're working on your ego. So those things get worked on, those things get transformed, but the soul remains the witness of that process. And it's good to keep that in mind. In fact, those who don't keep that in mind are not aware of the Advaitic path. They're not aware of the import of non-duality, non-dualism. And that's the saving grace for anyone who is starting into a path or into a practice, is to always remember that the soul cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. It cannot be made imperfect. It's perfect by its nature. And that soul thou art, they tell you in the great Mahavakyas. So in that way, entering into that gives you an advantage if you enter into a path knowing that the soul is perfect, but that you have to work on this body-mind mechanism and cut it in the image, if you want to use that metaphor of Christ. Cut it in the image of divinity. So as if the human form itself is a kind of template, like with the spine and the 7 chakras and so forth. It's a kind of a model for divinity but it's a sort of a diamond in the rough. So that's your business, is to work on it and refine it and bring out the divinity in mankind, as Vivekananda would say. Now, knowing this essential bit of information, then we should also probably come to know what true freedom is. As they talk about moksha and mukti as being freedom or spiritual emancipation, but you see there's really no good word for it, because since the soul is ever free and it never was bound, then you can't say it was emancipated, or you can't say that it got free. So we should jump to this quote down here, which is the best explanation in the fewest amount of words I've ever come upon to explain that conundrum. He says, "Moksha or mukti is not to be considered a state or experience yet to come. It is the eternal condition of the self, which is nothing other than Brahman." So if you're thinking in terms of a post-mortem emancipation, as my teacher used to talk about, then of course that's not cutting it. That's not defining moksha or mukti the way the Indian seers see it. And of course, if you say freedom or emancipation, then it suggests that the soul was once bound and it got free. So that conundrum is then explained by saying that it's always at hand. The state is always upon you. And that's actually the attitude they want you to adopt when you enter into sadhana. Whatever kind of yoga you're doing, whether it's Patanjali's 8-limbed yoga or the 6-limbed yogas he refers to there, or whether you're entering into Vedantic past or Buddhist studies, you should know that that Buddha nature, or that Atman, or that eternal soul, is pure and perfect, ever free and never bound, and then you won't misidentify it or disidentify with it. You'll be identifying with the Atman and not with the body, prana, mind, intellect, and ego, the 5 sheaths, you see. So as complex as this has gotten, it needs a rather complex philosophy to explain it. So we want to explain it, not complain it, you see. We don't want to complain about how complex a philosophy is. We just want to get in and see the facets of Mother's wisdom so that we can use them against that tendency of the mind to fall into the complexities of Maya. That is, we prefer the complexities of Dharma over the complexities of Maya. That's all there is to it. And some of those will be useful then when you understand Viveka and Vairagya, for instance, which we talked about last week and which we will talk about more again next week. There's discrimination between the real and the unreal, which said in English speak is separating the wheat from the chaff. And detachment from the unreal once you've seen that it is unreal. Otherwise there's this admixture, like oil and water mixed, and you can't tell the difference between the two. And that's what gets people into all sorts of troubles called karma. That is, they get into the problems and then there's hell to pay. And you reap what you sow, and that can become a cycle that's never-ending or non-ending. So just with the recitation of that sloka, mukti and moksha is not something to be attained or an experience yet to come. It's something that's always at hand. Keeping that in mind, if you can understand that one point, then you probably have understood the whole chart. But in case you haven't, if it still seems rather alien to you that this binding condition that you find yourself in, when the gunas, or when the sattva guna goes away and when prakasha shakti is no longer there for your attainment, then all of a sudden you're faced with rajaguna and tamaguna, restlessness and slothfulness, or you're faced with covering power and distorting power, and your karmas are coming back on you and so forth, then all of a sudden you don't feel so high and mighty then again, do you? So you're feeling like the lowest and humblest of all beings, which actually isn't a bad state to be in. But you don't want to get into a self-deprecating state, a depressed state, because that's different than humility. So then you'll want to avail yourself of these ways of convincing the mind, but the mental mechanism. You see, the thoughts, the ego, the intelligence, all that has to be charged up, Sri Ramakrishna said. Charge up the chitta, he would say. Chitta means your thoughts. Otherwise they become very dead, you see, and they fall like rainwater seeking the highest place. So charge up the thoughts daily with these, the chitta, with these pure, more higher vibrations, and by these spiritual practices, plug into the source and charge yourself up. Now, any of the objections that might be raised against this teaching of moksha could start right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. See? One is freedom, that when you talk about mukti or moksha, you're not talking about something that is produced or generated. So, sounds a little bit like a repetition of this, but these are the 4 different objections that the mind might raise against this teaching of moksha. Number 1, that you think maybe it'll come about over time via evolution, whether it's the evolution of one life for you, or whether it's the evolution of a species for hundreds and thousands of years. You think you're going to get it eventually in time, but that's again back to that misnomer of a post-mortem emancipation, when the soul is there perfect outside of time. It doesn't get developed or pulled into time. All activities are taking place in nature. They're not taking place in your soul. Your soul is stationary and steady and non-dual. And it's not subject to birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. They're called the six transformations, or the six billows, like hunger and thirst. So it's always the witness of the whole process, and that's what we want to try and identify with. So it's not freedom from the senses that you're looking for, or freedom from passion, or freedom from nature, or freedom from desire, or freedom from sin. All of those things have been proposed to you by reformists, by people who are trying to convince you that that the soul is somehow perfect and is going to be made perfect later. See, they're talking about man's sinful nature. You're talking about tamasic mind, rajasic mind, bound mind. You see, mind has gotten into a distracted, or as we were talking about this morning, fragmented condition. That's where all these apparent evils are coming from, these negativities, and not from the soul. So you don't want to mix those two up and get confused between the ego soul and the supreme soul. And again, one of the teachings why it's nice to make a little distinction between Brahman and Atman. So we have a word for our true nature before the hailstone falls in the ocean. No doubt the hailstone is the same material essence as the ocean, water, but right now it's in a solidified state, and that's the ego, you see. So before it falls into the ocean, we need a word for that ocean-like nature that we intuit inside of us. We can call that Atman, you see. Nobody goes around saying, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. Ramakrishna didn't really like that saying coming from people who hadn't yet studied the scriptures or hadn't yet had any spiritual experience. So he said to be careful about saying such things before you're ready. But you can go around saying, I am Atman. The self is Atman. I have a word for that. And then you have a sort of way of a penultimate way again of reaching towards the highest goal. So number one is very important then. Don't mistake moksha as a product of evolution or something that comes about via development or transformation. Number two is it's not a result of evolution, development, or transformation. I just said that. It's not freedom from which is produced or generated, nor is it a result of evolution, development, and transformation. And the bullet points there are, it's not the solving of problems. Moksha is not that. You won't get moksha by solving your problems. You'll probably just get sattva by solving your problems. That is some peace of mind and some happiness and some contentment, but that necessarily doesn't last. It's not brought about by some power above or outside of you. I hope nobody looks up when they pray anymore, unless they're practicing the deification of the stars or the planets, you see, and they want to see Brahman in those things. Basically, you should be looking inside when you pray. Pray to your own self. Pray to the mother who is your own self. Pray to your own Atman. So that's what's meant here. You can't get emancipation or this moksha by something above or outside of yourself. It is your very self, so you're going to have to look within for it. It's not the disappearance of weakness or imperfections. A lot of people, they're working on themselves and they get rid of a few bad habits, and then all of a sudden they start feeling better about themselves and they think, oh, I'm getting free, I'm getting free. You're just getting free from things that should never have been there in the first place, like drinking and smoking and those kinds of things. So, any kinds of addictions. those things should have never imposed himself upon the mind anyway. So what you're really looking for is the return of the pure mind, getting rid of the impure mind. And then with the pure mind, you might be able to see that Atman. It's like a lens that you polish. The mind itself is not Brahman, neither is the intellect, nor either is the ego, of course. So those things are becoming perfect mechanisms through which you can use, through which you can see reality, and by which you can reach it. So don't think of just working on yourself and getting stronger or something, or getting rid of these imperfections is moksha. That's a good thing, it's sadhana, but it's not this ever pure state we're talking about. Number 3 says it's not something to be attained, not the result of movement away from one's source. So you don't want to fall into the misnomer that you can attain the Atman, because then that puts you further away from it. And that's one of the problems of sadhana, actually. Sadhana is the cutting edge for transforming you, but the problem with sadhana is that you can begin to become a professional student, as they say, a professional disciple, instead of having the experience of oneness. And sadhana will always keep you in that mode of seeking. But Holy Mother, here on our altar, she used to say, don't seek God, see God. That's a very good few-word mantra. Don't seek God, see God. So she's coming from that non-dual position of Advaita, and she is the Shakta, no doubt. So Shakta Advaita Vada, she's pretty much encapsulating it all in that one phrase. Don't seek God, see God. So your sadhana is for purifying your body-mind mechanism, your prana, and so forth. But the Atman is remaining pure through all of that. And that's what the advantage the Advaitist has when they hear the truth, and then the truth sets them free. Then they begin to work on things in the world. Maybe their own world, and then maybe the world of others too. They begin to work on them. So that number 3 is another powerful point to make. Number 4, it's not something to be realized via purification. Not due to the soul's fall from its original status, because the soul doesn't fall. It's always there. It's the mind which becomes obscured. Its wisdom becomes obscured at the time of birth, usually, because in the previous lifetime it died in a state of ignorance or incomplete knowledge, undigested knowledge. So then it will be reborn again to pick up the thread of its last lifetime and see if it can realize that coming and going is all mere nonsense, as Vivekananda put it. Where's the time in which the soul will come when all of time is in the soul? And where's the space to which it will go and come from when all the space is in the soul? So he's saying very nicely, time and space are in you. The mind projects them outwardly and then fixes the body there, and then all of a sudden you're trapped in various locations, and you call it space, and trapped in various situations, and you call it karma, and trapped in various phases of time, like infanthood and childhood and adulthood and so forth. And you're defining your whole soul in terms of those movements, space, time, and causality, which, remember, is nama, rupa, desha, kala, nimitta. That's the definition of Maya, just the platform upon which she's sitting. Kala, desha, nimitta, and nama and rupa. It is time, space, causality, name, and form are 5 good, powerful words that make up this world-bewitching Maya, which perplexes the mind and makes it forget precious truths like this, that the soul is ever free and never bound. Sri Ramakrishna told that to Swami Vivekananda once. He said, I will tell you the absolute truth. And he told him the truth about the perfection of his true nature. And he said, now put that in your wearing cloth and hide it away, and then take it everywhere with you. And any time that you want to remind yourself of your true nature, just take it out and look at it and hide it away again. So that's why Vivekananda later was to say, was supposed to give us teachings like that. So everyone should hear the truth of the non-dual Atman first, and then they should go about their practice, and they should go about their lives. But if they don't hear that truth first, Shruti, as we were talking about this morning, then it's a lot more roundabout course the soul takes, trying to get back to its equipoise and its balance, its contentment, its peace, its bliss. And when it can't get back to those things, then qualities like compassion and those kinds of things never get developed in it. So in order to work on those things that are a part of development, you have to know this first, that all development is a facade, that the soul doesn't transform. That's right there, a parinama. You see on this sideboard of this pillar. On this side is a Jativada, and this side is a parinama. Two of the great rules, great pillars of non-duality. There's no transformation going on here, it just seems like there is. And the other side, there's no birth and there's no death for the soul, it just seems like there is. Or birth and death is really going on in nature with the body, that's all. But you are neither nature nor you're the body. That's why you study Kaivalya, right? To know that you can separate yourself from nature at any time you want. You do it tonight, every night in deep sleep. Why can't you do it consciously or at the time of your death? Give up your desire for the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. Those are your 5 desires, and they keep you in form. You don't want to be kept in form, you want to be kept informed. So these teachings are trying to inform you of your true nature. That's Advaita, and this class is called Shakta Advaita Vada, the path of non-duality as shown or revealed by the Divine Mother Shakti. Now, it's not due to the soul's fall from its original source, this bullet point, and it's also not because the world is corrupt or needs escaping. That's another problem that the mind will fall into when they hear the non-dual teachings or the monastic teachings or any teachings from a great avatar or seer. They think all of a sudden that all of this is bad, I have to renounce it or give it up. But remember, we were talking this morning about renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So the real key that the great seers have come upon in their practice, when they did their practice and got their realization, when they attained moksha or mukti and became a jivan mukta, was this fact that all of this is Brahman. So if it is all Brahman and you're not seeing it as Brahman, then you better practice deifying it. Because if you practice it as sin or as evil or as something negative that you have to get rid of, then that's not going to end in a full realization. It's not going to end in a mature renunciation. It's going to be always incomplete. So that is the teaching behind you don't renounce the world or seek liberation because the world is corrupt or needs renouncing. The world is Brahman. That's why we chant quite often, Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagad Cha. Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye. One without a second, Brahmadvitiye. Shrutayaha Pramanam. There's proof to this. So means basically the conclusion of the Vedanta is that all this is Brahman, and Jagat, the world, is mentioned there. Sakalam Jagat Cha. You see, time, Sakalam, that's Brahman. The world also is Brahman, so you cannot renounce it out of condemnation. You have to deify it, and then it'll turn into Brahman. It's the spiritual alchemy everyone's looking to learn. Then they can love their spouse, then they can love their children, and then they can love their neighbor and so forth without any problem in the way, you see. Otherwise there's always this reservation. Even amongst the best people, the most moral people, there's always this realization because they haven't realized it's the same self there as here. And it's the same Brahman in everything that's here. The Atman exists equally in everyone and everything, in quality and in quantity, but it's only the mechanism it gets into, you see, that delimits it or limits it. If consciousness is in the plant form, then it's very limited. It's in the animal form, it's fairly limited, you see. When it gets into the human form, especially if it's done as purificatory practice, then it begins to become unlimited. It begins to realize its infinite nature. And in the seer and the saint and the avatar, it's fully realized. In fact, the forms don't become a limitation to it anymore. They're divine forms. You're inhabiting a divine world and you're in a divine body. I've seen it. And there are beings who are living in that state, like my guru was. So that's a good point there. It's not due to the soul's fall from its original status. You have to define moksha by a different kind of definition, on a different level. It's not because the soul has gathered impurities. Again, that's the reformer, the fire-darting reformer, Vivekananda used to tell him, who makes a mess out of religion, wants to try and convince you that your nature is sinful and so forth, and that's never the way to proceed. And Christ didn't proceed that way when he met people who were laboring under so-called transgressions or sins. He would just free them, remind them of their true nature, and then remind the others who were criticizing that they were also falling from their true nature by judging others. See? So all of these points here, these bullet points beside these 4 cautions, are all wrapped up in these 2 quotes. See, don't mistake moksha for anything else than an ever pure state of liberation, always and already at hand. And then you'll know what India means by freedom. Not political, not a freedom of a vacation, or freedom from a couple of weeks from your kid or your kids or children, or any other kind of freedom that you can think of. This is a freedom that is the very freedom of the soul, and those who know of it live in it. They alone, to them belong peace and to none else, as we just chanted in one of the slokas before class. So this is at the top of the pillar here for no good reason, not for no good reason, you see, because we want to make sure that when we study, when we hear words like moksha or mukti or mumukshutvam, or any of these great principles, that we know what they mean by freedom. We won't mistake it for any of these things. These are freedom as compared to philosophy, freedom as defined by religion, freedom as defined by morality, and freedom as defined by conventional means. They're not freedom as it truly is. So we must know that there is an ultimate station, and that these penultimate stations are subject to change. But this is not. The Atman is not subject to any change. It's immutable. And it's eternally perfect. If we understand that about moksha and mukti, which is one of the great facets of Indian philosophy, then we will not run afoul of our sadhana or our practice. We can do our sadhana with the prime results, because we won't have fallen into any of these misconceptions about what freedom is or isn't. And it's really very much viveka vairagya, see, at the crown up there. It's very much right discrimination and proper detachment from unreal things. There are plenty of things in the world to get behind you, you know. The world itself is not the problem. Nature is really not the problem because it's insentient. But those things that the mind projects that are evils, and mixed things and so forth, false projections, those you can eliminate and do away with. Delusions and so forth, because they're purely non-existent. But when you talk about soul, you're talking about something that's purely existent with a capital E. So, meaning of moksha and mukti, Shankara sings about that. Aham nirvikalpo nirakara rupo Vibhutvacha sarvatra sarvendriyanam nacha sangatam naiva muktirnameya chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. He says, I have no form and no fancy. I have no form and no fancy. His desires are gone, and that includes the desire for form, for taking a form again. Vivekananda used to say, I want to be a voice without a body, and just inform everyone. So he wanted to stay as a transcendent mouthpiece, an oracle, but never take on the problems of the body again. He himself only stayed 39 years in it. Shankara 32. Well, they might as well have been the same person. So he says, I have no form, I have no fancy, the all-pervading am I, vibhutvacha sarvatra. I am the all-pervading soul. So there's the idea, if something is all-pervading and unchanging, then it's not going to fall into any of the definitions of transformation. See, it's going to remain aparinama. When you're talking about the changes that go on, you're talking about parinama, nature, relationships, bodies, planets in space, everything going through cycles of change. But this one thing remains the same. This one thing remains the same. So, he says, everywhere I exist, I am beyond the senses. Sarvendriyanam. I am beyond the senses, all the senses. I'm beyond the seeing, I'm beyond smelling, I'm beyond tasting, touching, and hearing. I transcend the senses. And he says, neither salvation am I, nor anything that can be known. So salvation is suggested here, isn't it? Repentance, sin, reformation, all those things are suggested in these ways of thinking. But there is no, when you reach moksha, there is none of that. So you realize not only is it not applied to you, but it never really applied to you. You were dreaming it. And those dreams, some of those dreams were nightmares. And they were falsely held projections on your part. But you were always the pure and perfect self. All you needed to do was meditate a while each day, realize that, and then stand up and walk around in Brahman. Walk in Brahman, think in Brahman, eat in Brahman, sleep in Brahman, with her as your witness, you see. And then that's all there is to it. Just keep the mirror of the mind polished, clean every day. With that one thought, I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. I am pure consciousness and bliss, Chidananda Rupaha. See, if you're going to be a Rupa, why not be Chidananda Rupa? Rupa means form. So why not be the very form of bliss and existence? Satchidananda. Why don't you take that as your form? If you're so damn obsessed with form, then why don't you take that as your form? Start assuming the stance of that form. I am, this self is Brahman. And then he ends saying, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. That's the 6th verse of the Nirvana Shatkam. We usually sing the 5th verse, but I thought I'd treat you to a different one today. So a little bit then in this first half of about moksha, or you can also call it mukti. Those are synonymous words, really. And what it is, and then what it is not. The one thing that it is, and then all of these things which you must not mistake for it. No conventional means or means that happen by evolution or by transformation or by purification. No, 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 no. Na, 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 na. not this, not this. Neti, neti. Practice that discriminatory process then between what is true freedom and what is this, all these other shades of freedom which people are accepting to be true freedom, right on down to our vaunted American Western political freedom, you see, which, if you haven't realized, is very Mayic by now. Then you haven't got a clue, you see. So let's stand up for eternal perfection, which is moksha. Now, that takes us into some of these other areas that we want to look at. And I think next I wanted to look at this teaching about Nirvikalpa and Savikalpa, because it comes next as we work our way down this beautiful chart. Now, the chart that I wanted to show you about asampragata and sampragata samadhis is next, so you can have a look at that. In other words, we talked about seated samadhis, didn't we? And then, in terms of there being many of them, but only one unseated samadhi. So when you say sampragyata, and it means a seated state of higher awareness. But when you say asam pragyata, then you mean the one seedless state, because there can only be one of those. We call it Nirvikalpa in Vedanta, but Patanjali here calls it, in yoga, calls it asampragyata. Now, he says here at the beginning, the wisdom samadhi is of 4 levels. The first is attended by basic thought, vitarka. The second is by subtle thought, vichara. Then the third is sattvic bliss, ananda, and the sense of I amness, asmita, is the fourth. So all of these have shades of, let's say, have seeds in them. They have, these are higher seeds. Remember, when we talk about samadhi, we're not talking about your everyday level of consciousness that the conventional person is used to, mundane human awareness, as it's called. That, of course, is fraught with dualities and difficulties. By the time you reach seated samadhis, you probably have accomplished everything he recommended. You've become nonviolent, ahimsa. You begin to take truth as your path, satyam. You've begun to, long ago, probably give up coveting the goods of other beings or other countries, which is again back to your politics, isn't it? And you've also started to study the scriptures, swadhyaya, and look into what the seers are saying, shruti, the higher scriptures, and you've begun to subject yourself to austerity, tapas, they call it, and you begin to increase your devotion to God with form. That is, beginning to see God in everything and so forth. So all of these things are the consistency of the first 2 limbs of yoga. The yamas and the niyamas are called. So this is going to be in place before you begin to have experience of samadhi, lower samadhi. And then you're going to have to learn how to sit in a position like this for hours at a time without discomfort, that is, controlling the body or controlling your position. And you're going to have to control and regulate your breath, because by controlling and regulating your breath, you get a hold of or aware of the prana that's flowing through the marvelous human form. And its subtler aspects too, not just how it digests food and causes the heart to beat and the blood to pump and so forth. Those are just the gross aspects of it. The dhatus and the rasas, he called them. He was a great healer on all levels. But you begin to become aware of the prana and the psychic prana, how the energy connects to the mind, and whether it's how the thoughts get charged up, as we were talking about earlier, by this prana, by getting hold of this prana. And people who let their bodies and their prana go become very listless and lifeless and dull, lethargic. It's hard to, and then of course they become subject to the passions. 6 passions: lust, anger, fear, greed, avarice, pride, those kinds of things. And the 8 fetters too: shame, grief, and so forth. They become very susceptible to those, and any little thing will throw them a curve, and they won't be able to hit that curve. So that's the downside of not of losing sight of your prana, which is the 4th limb of yoga. But to get it back again, gain it back by degrees, is beginning to connect it inwards to the thoughts, the psychic prana it's called. And that's going to take you to a much more stable position, as long as you don't get sidetracked by occult things, which some people do. And you stay on the straight and narrow, then you're beginning to head for what yoga wants you to have. Not the psychic powers or the occult powers, but the samadhis that are there, that are inside the Atman. They're just like a gold mine or a jewel, a diamond mine, you see. You can be picking them up like Ramakrishna was every day, having a different samadhi. And they're mother's samadhis after all. She's giving them to you. That's why sometimes we sing about them even in certain beautiful hymns. Vijita sahasra karaikya sahasra karaika sahasra karaika nute Ritu surataraka sangarataraka sangarataraka sunitute Surata samadhi samana samadhi samana samadhi sujatarate Jaya Jaya He Mahishasura Mardini Kamyaka Pardini Tailasute Jaya Jaya He Mahishasura Mardini Kamyaka Pardini Shailasute. Remember that beautiful hymn to the Divine Mother Durga? She goes singing Surata Samadhi Samana Samadhi 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 Samadhi. So many different kinds of samadhis to have in this Divine Mother path. Samana Samadhi is like with a samadhi of the mind. Unmana Samadhi is a samadhi without the mind. See, so again, there are samadhis that happen in the mind, like knowledge samadhis. That would be these, what he's talking about here. Basic thought and subtle thought. Those are pretty much in the mind, aren't they? But when it begins to get more toward, you might say, to use an analogy, the heart, and then you begin to have bliss samadhis. And when it gets more towards the transcendence toward transcendence itself, then it's more of an I am samadhi that's going on. So these are gradated levels of samadhi. We've taken them in retreat and talked about them for days at a time, for hours, in yoga retreats we've given in SRV year to year, and so that they will be implemented into our minds, and we won't never forget them. So possibly then all of a sudden when they descend upon us, we'll know what's happening to us, instead of being taken by surprise. So these various samadhis are there in number, like gems strewn around the floor of a cave, and you just have to find your way into that cave of the heart and pick them up, you see. So those, keep that in mind, because it's a way of simplifying the most complex philosophy in the world, yoga. And this is really a hard, deep, people are really only on the surface of it when you're talking about something like hatha. But when you talk about 8-limbed yoga, Patanjali, thousands of years went by in India before somebody finally came and crystallized this into a darshana. Yoga is fairly recent, really. I mean, Patanjali's yoga. Into an 8-limbed system. He collected all that, coalesced it all. See, it's got so many connections. We have an email course in SRV right now that we're offering to people. It's been going on for 4 or 5 years. And we're only 2/3 of the way through all the sutras. So it's very, very profound to follow, and has many, many gems. And the whole thing about yoga is samadhi. Yoga is samadhi. Samadhi is yoga. They don't want you to get confused about that point, just like they don't want you to get confused about the difference between lower freedom and higher freedom, absolute freedom. So they're very clear about the distinctions and the differences. Now keep those 4 in mind. There's a samadhi of basic thought, You might see an intellectual might even have that, where they get very, very high on their own thoughts, you see. And then there's a samadhi of subtle thought, where you start thinking beyond the intellect's ken, or ken. You see, it begins to get into a deeper level of thinking, which has more to do with scriptural teachings and meditation and contemplation on a more dharmic level of thinking, teachings that you get from seers who have had these profound realizations. And then it can move to this sananda, it's called. That means with bliss. Sananda samadhi. All of a sudden you're starting to have these devotional moods and blisses come upon you. And then finally they'll go to this I amness samadhi, sasmita. And you begin to take your own ego to task, and more than that, the ego doesn't want to die, so it transforms into a cosmic ego. Why are you meditating on Krishna or Ramakrishna all the time? Because they have cosmic egos, see? And the cosmic ego is stripped of all its poison, and it's just all benign, magnificent and benign, you see, full of sattva and good qualities, and willing to give them to you, willing to bestow them upon you if you will just approach and stay focused. So think about those 4 seated samadhis, and to sort of show them, here you see the level, and you see the condition of mind associated with each of them. You see their aim, and you see their method. So if you're at the level of savitarka samadhi, it's usually accompanied by gross thought, focused on names and forms, mixed with the gunas, and shadowed by doubt. So it's got its nectar and it's got its poison, doesn't it? I mean, the gunas are there, and they could be either poisonous or nectar-like. Nectarine, see? Depends on which guna you're talking about at any given time. And names and forms are still there. Now there's a rub, but that can also be a good thing if you've deified the name and form. That is, if you've given up thinking about the seductive human form, as Shankara says in Bhaja Govindam, and you begin thinking more about the defined form of God or Mother. You see, you're beginning to image them in your deepest contemplations. And that can be turned into a very powerful nectar. But shadowed by doubt, there's no doubt about doubt. That's negativity that you're going to have to overcome. That's curtain of nations type of stuff. That's cloud of unknowing. And that needs to be stripped away. So that's the condition of somebody who's in a savitarka state of samadhi. There are good things there, but there are also mixed things there, mixed with the gunas, for instance. The aim is to refine concentration by focusing on objects, names, meanings, so that it leads to fuller comprehension. So there you are, almost what I was saying both this morning and earlier today in this class. You want to deify names and forms. That's how the Tantricists would put it in Tantric philosophy. You want to deify the names and the forms. So if you're doing a puja in front of the article, in front of the altar, then all the articles need to be polished, and mantras said over them, and treated like each one of them is a divinity or a god placed before another god. Everything is surrounded by divinity. So you want to create that ambiance inside of your puja. And if you can do that, maybe you can do that back home. You leave the temple. Go back and see your wife as the living goddess, and the kitchen is a place where prasad is to be prepared and so forth. You can transform your whole life that way. So that will all begin at the level of achieving a higher state of savitarka samadhi, to refine concentration by focusing on objects. It's one of the 7 ways which the Father of Yoga gives you, 7 methods for realizing higher awareness, is to concentrate on a pratika or a pratima. Pratika would be like a candle in a windless place, or it could be a little statue of Ram or the Buddha. So that's called a pratika or a pratima. And you keep that on your altar and worship it, and it focuses your thoughts. You focus your thought inside of a stone obelisk. See, it's not the actual stone obelisk that's the divine. It's your consciousness that's being invested in it that has the divine potential. Holy places aren't holy because they just happen to be, the rocks there happen to be holy. It's because people went there and invested their consciousness in that temple or in that rock, in that lingam, you see. Consciousness is only in the human being. And if consciousness falls, then the place isn't that holy anymore. The temple isn't holy anymore because nobody's practicing anything higher there. See, nobody's having samadhi there. But go in to take a divine soul and place them in that place, and all of a sudden the place vibrates with holiness and it becomes a holy place, and people are going there on pilgrimage, you see. So it's the human consciousness that's divine, or not, as the case may be. The vibration gets raised or it gets lowered, or it gets maintained even. So very important teachings happen by refining your consciousness, by using names and forms. Again, why renounce the world out of condemnation? Why not take it and say, this is part of God too, now I have to prove it to myself, and I will deify it, I will turn it into divinity. Be the power of my own consciousness, because consciousness doesn't exist anywhere else but in you. See? That's the source. Now, the method you use is strive via basic knowledge to comprehend the world, the manifest deities, and the 16 Visheshas. I told you it was getting a little bit complex, yoga. So you have to start learning your 24 cosmic principles. Air, earth, fire, water, ether, and tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling. They're not that hard to learn. And you connect them, and then they become avisheshas or visheshas, that is, alambanas. They become focuses for your meditation. You can spend a lot of time meditating just on the power of the eye to see, or hearing, or concentrating just on water, or taste. See, the yogi actually has samadhis of the senses by concentrating on the nose. Then all of a sudden he smells divine aromas that weren't there before. Divine tastes, divine sounds, divine sights are there. Your consciousness just needs to be connected up with them consciously. Not by random, like, oh, I'll have some samadhi someday, like a post-mortem samadhi, you see. But bring it into being right now by the power of your own, by your own connecting power, you see. Live in that. Make that your ideal, and never fall from the ideal. So, this is where deities come in. So you basically begins to become subtle thought. That's savichara. The condition is accompanied by subtle thought, focused on wisdom, and attended by inward analysis. And there you find this samadhi of wisdom beginning to kick in. You've studied the scriptures, you've listened to the teacher, taken a guru, you've begun to practice meditation, and all of a sudden you're starting to have some semblance of this bliss. It's not full-blown yet, come into your thinking process. And this is going to give way to bliss that is beyond your thinking process, which is more toward the bliss of the Atman. But in the meantime now you're getting shades of it, or again aromas of it, or scents of it, or sounds of it, in a state of refined intellect. This is usually where Dharma kicks in. Let's see. The aim is to transcend the imperfections in nature and perceive the subtle essence of things. So you're already preparing yourself for Kaivalya, aren't you? Everything in yoga is set up that way. You might arrive at a place where the actual goal of what you are seeking kicks in, but it only kicks in because it has been set up by things that were similar to it, very similar. You see, and then all of a sudden it begins to mature, and you're taking with you all of the past into the present, all in terms of your sadhana. It's all culminating. You begin to feel this. You see, usually your world is rocked a little bit at first, and then you begin to settle in. These things begin to settle, like an upheaval, and then it all has to settle again. Air, silt, whatever, karmas, and then all of a sudden you're in a steady state again. And that upheaval changed the view, you see. And now you can see better. You see things more clearly, right? And it's happening to it all the time. Looking that direction, because She sent me an email that said those very things today. Things are getting clearer. So you begin to transcend the imperfections in nature. That really means forbear them at this place. You're not bothered by them anymore, you accept them. But you're not holding out any false hope for nature being your home. Birds have nests, foxes have holes. You don't have any place to lay your head here. Probably has never been said so clearly as by Jesus, that man is not made for earth. Man's soul is divine. This is a sojourn here. And now you just have to figure out how to stay out of the quagmire, get stuck, and always remain soaring. It's in the state of samadhi. So these samadhis are sort of like tracks the seers have laid for you to follow. The method there that you use is striving via subtle nadis to comprehend the 6 avisheshas. So now you're getting up more into the level of the subtle senses and the mind, the fourfold mind and so forth. These are higher things to meditate on than water, earth, fire, air, and ether. Now you're starting to take your own ego as a place to meditate. What is that ego? Who am I? See? Am I that separate eye maker inside of me that always wants to cut out space for itself? What are the limitations to that ego? Why is it such a rascal? How can I divinize it? How can I deify it? How can I turn it into or towards the cosmic ego, the greater personality, instead of the lesser personality that's so problematic? See? So basically, you're beginning to meditate on things like mind, thought, ego. And those are your alambanas now, your foundations for meditation. This is the way yoga proceeds. Usually when you come to Vedanta, they say, here, meditate on this great soul, or meditate on this Atman. That's it. Poof. You're ready for it. But it's a little bit optimistic in today's day and age that many people are that ready for Vedanta like that. And yoga is, so Vedanta is more of a statement of truth that you have to raise yourself up to, and yoga is more of a step-by-step process by which you can do that. That's why yoga and Vedanta have such a great relationship. There are centers out there that I've visited and taught at and played music at, the Yoga Vedanta Center. That's, so they really know the connection between those two darshanas, which are two of the Ashtaka darshanas. We'll look at those briefly after the break, if we can get through this. So we're looking at these seated samadhis, which are here, sampragyata side of things, or savikalpa, with time, with form, with name, only how to take name and form and begin to refine them, turn them into what they are instead of what they seem to be according to my impure mind or my impure vision. Now if you get to Sananda, all of a sudden it's accompanied by intelligence, focused on subtlemost causes and enraptured by bliss. So bliss is sort of a nectar that begins to leak out of the soul almost naturally, you see, when the intellect has become pure. A lot of people don't know the connection between jnanam and bhakti, how close that connection is. The two wings of the bird, as my teacher used to call it. And so here in yoga it's explained very well that when the intellect has really had its samadhis, about as far as it can go, then all of a sudden it's starting to get more towards the bliss of the self. Not the bliss that can be added on later, but the bliss that is actually the very nature of a thing. They talk about the moon having borrowed light, but the sun has got its own light, right? Self-effulgent. Svayam Jyoti is the Sanskrit word. So in that way you can use that same analogy here for the Atman. It's got its own bliss, but intellect is always borrowing it from the teachings, from the Dharma, from the Guru. It's always looking and searching around, casting around for those things to sustain itself. But when it gets close to the soul, it realizes that's a sun there. That's 1,000,000 suns. That might be a sun which will take you 11 centuries to fly around in a jet. They found a sun that big in the skies now. So the Atman is like that, huge. It has its own self-effulgent light, which is called bliss. And yes, it is the bliss of understanding. You can't really, or the understanding of bliss. either way you want to put it, it's melding there together. See, like any good amalgam should, see, produce the desired effect in you. So the condition is accompanied by higher intelligence. The aim is to concentrate on ego, enjoy the fount of bliss contained in the personal sense of I-ness. So I jumped the gun a little bit here, but I was telling you that it would be headed towards Sananda, which would use the ahamkara for your pole of meditation. I have to meditate on myself now. Now, what do I think myself is? Is it a personality? Is it a separate I from Brahman? Am I and my Father too? All these things have to cross your mind, and you're going to have to look at that ego in terms of its inception, in terms of its origin. Where did it come from? That's always the key in Indian darshanas. They look at origins of things. And that origin is tested to the hilt to see if it has another origin, cause and effect style. Because you have to use Maya against Maya in that way. The higher Maya has to be used against the lower Maya. So when you come down to Desha, Kala, Nimitta, Nimitta means cause and effect, you're going to have to look very deep for the cause, the real cause of everything. Christ helped the apostles by saying, in the beginning was the Word, John, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He cut to the chase and let everyone know that that was the origin of all things, the Word. But the Almighty Father was not an origin. It cannot be an origin. We've already discussed freedom, haven't we? We've already discussed ultimate reality. We've already discussed non-duality. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end, so it won't have an origin, and it won't be the cause of anything. It just is. And when you're studying Sananda, you're coming to the I amness of a thing. The I amness means, as he said up here, right? Sattvic bliss, the sense of I amness, asmita. That's samadhi with ego. So you can see why these are still seated samadhis. The unseated samadhi is still to come because that's irrelatable. You cannot explain that, you see. That's got to be experienced for itself. But you can find some words for these, and Patanjali did. Not only did he find words for them, he describes their condition, their aim, and their method. This is right out of the sutras. I've borrowed this chart, formed it into a chart. So the ego is going to be your aim there. Sounds kind of contradictory, doesn't it? Because usually people are running away from the ego as fast as they can in spiritual life. Oh, that's the culprit. Let's diminish it. Let's get rid of it. But Vivekananda always said, you always go from the specific to the general, and from the general to the more general, and from the more general to the cosmic. That's the way most people proceed. They're going to deify the thing and broaden it. Women are like that, he says. Women know intuitively that it's all a matter of accretion. It's not a matter of diminution. You add on to the thing. And so in this meditation on the ego, you don't deflate it. You deflate the poisonous part of it. Sure, that's in your early sadhana, but you're talking about samadhi here. This isn't early sadhana anymore. This is where you should be after 10 or 15 years, according to Swami Vivekananda, 6 months. You should be at this place, you see. You should be able to become a yogi in 6 months. That's a direct quote out of his commentary on Patanjali's yoga system called Raja Yoga. It's on the shelf there, pick it up. And while you're at it, tune into our lessons that SRV is giving, the email lessons. Start taking them. So the asmita is on the way, or it's this word, sasmita. The method that you use in Sananda is transcend the gross and subtle objects to attain and enjoy the bliss of refined ego. So welcome news, welcome words that there is an ego state that is mature. And that was Sri Ramakrishna's teachings to us all the time, wasn't it? If you read the gospel, he would say, some people would go up to him and said, how do I get rid of the ego? And he said, don't. You can't get rid of the ego as long as you're in a body. It's impossible. You wouldn't be in the body if you didn't have an ego. It's the first sheath. It's the first covering over Atman. I'm putting words there. But he said, don't get rid of it, just mature it. See, mature. It's immature when it's turned away from God, and as soon as it turns toward God, it becomes mature. He was not mincing words. He loved devotion. He loved God with form. He loved God beyond form. He'd had both kinds of samadhis. He was the authority. He was the Kali Yuga avatar. He could tell you this. And it would make a great impression on you, and then you could go forward with all speed towards the goal. So, the refined ego is something you saw in him. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, if you saw anything in him, the only thing that kept him in the body was this refined ego. Pakvahamkara and apakvahamkara. It's the word, ahamkara. You see, right there. That's what you're using at that state to get your bliss. And in fact, that's where your bliss is coming from, your ego. And that's why it's such a problem. Because the ego has just a little bit of bliss. You see, we have to transcend the mind because it has a little bit of intelligence. Right? And we have to make it subtler intelligence. And as we do, our mind becomes God's mind. Becomes the mind of your guru, becomes the mind of the seers. Then it's going beyond mind, isn't it? Well, it's the same with bliss. At first it's just the bliss of your ego. It's a moon that's borrowing light from somewhere else. And so you have to have that first, and then realize how limited it is. And then finally turn and see the original. There's actually a line out of a song. Now turn and behold the original. Turn to your original face. Look inside at your true self. So this analysis that they're talking about, attain and enjoy the bliss of refined ahamkara, is going to be a very subtle thing that you're engaging in day by day inside your own deepest contemplations, deep meditations. Now to finish up this half, because we have just 2 minutes, let's look at sasmita. Its condition is accompanied by self-convergence, focused on I-ness and transcendent of the sattva guna. Here's where you go beyond even balance of mind. That is prakasha. You've had the revelation, but now you're getting beyond the sattva guna. And beyond the sattva guna means equanimity. You're not worried about having happiness anymore. Contentment doesn't quite cut it for you even. Peace of mind is coming closer to the point. But beyond peace of mind is this unexplainable, inexplicable bliss, you see, that you have to trace as an origin back to a cosmic ego. Here's where the connection to I and my Father are one begins. It begins with you get to the Father through the Son. You see. So you're beginning to see this source of everything. Krishna, who would be called in India probably, or Divine Mother. See. There you see an infinite amount of knowledge, wisdom, peace, and bliss. An infinite amount of them, a storehouse of it. So that turns the soul towards the Samprakata Samadhi. We won't get there yet though. To find the aim of it, you meditate on the I am in accordance with the highest cosmic principles. So this ego must become divine. It must begin associating itself with Guru, with teachings, with Advaita Vedanta, with Ishvara. The highest form of God the human mind can comprehend, Vivekananda says, Ishvara. You get to the Father through the Son. So this is the cosmic ego, or sometimes they call it the cosmic personality. Again, Krishna is a word that comes up in accordance with it in India. Now, the method would be transcending the ego's power to unify meditation, active meditation, and object of meditation. That's a very subtle triputi, triple teaching you're talking about there. You did the same thing with knowledge, didn't you? Knowing, active knowing, and object of knowing, and so forth. Now you're having to do the same thing with meditation. Who's meditating? What's it meditating for? What's it meditating upon? And how is it meditating, you see? And these kinds of things begin to fuse into a realization, which are the summation of Samprakata Samadhi. And just like Kaivalya will soon be the summation for a Sampragata Samadhi. It's right there actually that Kaivalya is supposed to be inserted, you see, right here in the space between these two. Because the experiences of Kaivalya we had in 7 steps last time fit right there. They were probably beginning to suggest themselves in these 4 seated samadhis more and more. By the time you get that close to a seedless samadhi, where I and my Father are one, or the hailstone is falling in the ocean, you're going to have those 7 steps of detaching yourself from nature, from form. You're going to have to realize yourself, realize that you never have been a form, and that nature was all coming out of you. It was all your dream, it was all your projection. And air, earth, fire, water, and ether, way back here, is what you meditated on in order to put that building block in place, right? So now you look back and it's not so hard for you to say, whereas at some point it is hard for you to say nature has come out of me. Who's saying that? It's all come out of my mind. Only the mind-only schools are saying that. The Ashtaka and Ashtaka schools are saying that in India, but not many other people are thinking that this has all come out of the mind. They're thinking nature is its own separate entity, and nature is actually all there is. We're materialists. Senses? Oh, we'll just be sensualists, you see. We'll put senses together with matter, and that's our world. And there will be no rhyme nor reason to it. And one lifetime will do it for me. So others are thinking in a different way. They're starting to think cause and effect way back inside the kingdoms of heaven, all the way back to the inception of everything in the Word. That's the way a cosmic being would explain it. A Jesus coming among the fishermen, or a Shankara coming among intellectuals and pundits in India at different phases of time. So they're going to bring out these secrets of deeper wisdom. But point being, by meditating on the 5 elements earlier, now it's not so hard for you to say, by the time you reach Kaivalya, oh, this has come out of me. There's no reason why I should remain attached to it. If it's an external projection, why don't I give it up? I can always get it back. I will take it back into me. See? Because I am. And I am the only I that exists. I am that. When everyone thinks that, Vivekananda says, then they will know it. But until they think that there are many different I's out there. Duality is persisting. But when you say I am and you really know it, then that becomes true, and you are the only I in existence. And all of the rest are taken in with you, just like thousands of hailstones falling into an ocean. So here we will take our break and come back and look at a Sampragata Samadhi, so that we know the contrast between seated and unseated samadhis on either side of her pillar, 2 pillars. Thank you for your kind attentions, and we will show the charts to the live streaming audience while we take our break. to continue on with the teachings of Sampragata Samadhi leading to Asampragata Samadhi, because we're on either side of these two pillars that surround Mother's raised diyas there. And you see Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Savikalpa Samadhi is the Vedantic way of talking about consciousness in time and outside of time, you might say. Kalpa means, Kalpanika means imaginations in time. So when you enter into the river of time, then with this mind complex, you're projecting various things and playing with forms and names and so forth. And it's like you do in the dream state tonight, which is why Ramana Maharshi said, this is dream number 1 and then dream number 2, you see. So he says both the waking and the dreaming states are dreamlike, all having to do with sankalpa, or mental projection. And yoga's way of saying that is asampragata and sampragata. So looking more at the strange phenomena of people entering into cycles of transmigration against their will, pulled along by karma and suffering as a result, so that Lord Buddha has to come and give you the Four Noble Truths, starting with there is suffering and there's a cause and then there's a way out. That happens again and again every 500 to 800 or so years, where a great soul like that comes and helps you remind those souls that are being drugged from birth to death and death to birth, as Vivekananda puts it in his poem. And so wants you to know that there is a way of transcending form, but there's also a way of living a divine life in form. Those are your two options, really. The other option, suffering with form, is not really an option for the conscious person. The only way, this is a quote from Vivekananda, the only way to prove to yourself that you're not matter is by leaving matter alone. So that's what's happening when you're having kaivalya, you're divorcing yourself from your long-time romance with nature, with form. Nature produces forms, with the aid of the mind, of course, because nature is the insentient material principle and mind is the sentient consciousness principle. Those two, bring them together and all sorts of mischief can happen. Forms by the millions arise over millions and millions of years. Might as well say millions of cycles, because when Maya kicks in, there's no beginning, middle, and end there either. Or you could say, as Shankar said, the only end to Maya would be when you reached Asampragata Samadhi, what he called moksha or mukti. So we're really looking at words in different periods of India's history, coined or used or utilized by different saints and seers and saints in India to really relate the same thing according to the condition of people in any given age or time. So when we talk about Savikalpa Samadhi, or in this case Sampragyata Samadhi, seated samadhis, and we're talking about a way of reaping the karmas of your spiritual practice, to live a dharmic and divine life. You begin to transcend suffering, which is actually one of the things that's going to happen in this process of Nirodha. Now, in order to introduce the 10 points that are here about Asampragata Samadhi, which is actually a lot to say, you don't find that much to say from anyone else but Patanjali on Seedless Samadhi or on Nirvikalpa. There's just nothing to say. All the great seers just sort of shut up. Their lips stop moving and their eyes get big and they smile, you see, or something. Or they, like Ramakrishna, you hear about Nirvikalpa or something and he just goes into it. Or if you ask him to explain what it's like, he goes into it, just thinking about it. It's how the mind is so open to suggestion when it's pure. Like a child's mind is open to suggestion when it's pure, you might have noticed. So, but a seer is not childish, it's childlike. So it has this ability just to, maybe even more of an ability, because that suggests some sort of effort, but just the tendency, the natural tendency to lean towards bliss and samadhi, which is really owned at the level of Sananda and Sasmita, isn't it? I mean, that's where your bliss is coming from, this light of all-attracting love and bliss that they talk about. And that's God with form, the highest form. Where rolls the stream of knowledge, bliss, and the truth that follows both. It just occurred to me, so I thought I'd use it. Knowledge, bliss, and the truth that follows both. That's one of Swami Vivekananda's verses to his Song of the Sannyasa. Wake up the note that had its birth far off, where worldly taint could never reach. In mountain caves and glades of forest deep, whose calm no sigh for lust or wealth or fame could ever dare to break, where rolled the stream of knowledge, truth, and the bliss that follows both, sing high that note, sannyasin bold, say Om Tat Sat Om. Om Tat Sat Om is the non-dual statement. See? That's the Sampragyata. So the whole thing is a very nicely well-led process of the soul back to its inception. But guess what? An inception that never happened. It's beyond inception. It's beyond conception. So when you talk about Sampragyata Samadhi and those souls that abide there, and then you're talking about souls that are keeping a blissful ego on purpose so that they can transmit knowledge to others, you take it in the opposite direction of which the aspirant is headed. In Samadhi, they're coming back down the ladder. They're coming back out the sixth chakra, and you're trying to get back into it, see, back to your source. They've already been there, and they're coming and going all the time. Or Aurobindo called it going up and down the amber stairs of birth and death, because you might as well be being born and dying every time you go to sleep, every time you breathe. Isn't the in-breath life, the held breath, or birth, and the held breath is life, and the out-breath is death, you see. So you're just echoing the sentiments of birth, life, and death with everything you do. Vivekananda said, the minute you're born, you're rushing towards death. All of us are. He just only took 39 years to do it, and Shankara 32. But in the meantime, they lived in Savikalpa Samadhi, that is, in this seated Samadhi, Sampragyata, because that's where you can hold the most bearable kind of ego. Because ego to them, who have been to non-dual form of Samadhi, is to be done away with. Why even take it back? See? So they're taking it on for your sake, taking on a body for your sake, and that's a kind of a body you're talking about, a wisdom body. And that's why you meditate on it with the methods and so forth, it's to make sure that you know that you have one. Otherwise you don't know that you have one. You may know that you have an intellect somewhere, but it's thinking, with the ego's help, I own that knowledge. See? But that's not the case with this knowledge that's mixed with bliss. They're not thinking, I own that. They're thinking, she owns it, and I'll prove it to you. I'll send Babaji Bob Kindler to you. You see, and he'll make a chart and show you. Be on hand. The year 2013 ends. You'll find out about Shakta Advaita Vada, which is an ancient path in India. So we're not teaching anything new. There's no new and old in the Atman. Right? No birth, death. So why should there be new and old? Can't talk about this as ancient wisdom. You might say perennial wisdom, or you have to say eternal wisdom. So when you talk about Sampragyata Samadhi, you're talking about beings living a dharmic or a divine life. When you talk about a Sampragyata Samadhi, you have to introduce it by talking about the states of mind. Nirodha is the fifth state of mind. First is Kshipta, scattered. That mind is no good for anything, you might have noticed. That is, if it's ever attacked you, for any given time, you were probably pretty useless when it did. And when you see other people who have made a habit of scattered mind, then the point comes home, you see. So that's the first state of mind. Second state of mind is muddha, dull. This is Patanjali's own teaching of the 5 states of mind, leading to Nirodha. So it's this process of Nirodha leading to a Sampragyata. You're going to have to get to Nirodha mind in order to get to a Sampragyata. So this is how it happens by words and teachings, according to the father of yoga, affectionately given that name. Although yoga was in existence long before him, Gita, Krishna was teaching all the yogas way, way back. So second state of mind is mudda, dull. Like Kshipta mind is like this sine wave. Dull mind, mudda mind's like this. Long valley. Then the third state of mind is vikshipta. That is sometimes high, sometimes low, sometimes peak, sometimes valley, you see. And so it's like a fly, Sri Ramakrishna said. That kind of mind is not good for yoga because sometimes it's like a fly resting on sweets, like that nice white organic pineapple we had at the break that the live streaming audience couldn't taste, sorry. And sometimes lighting on filth, like a sore or worse. So that kind of mind is not good for yoga either. It can't make up its mind. It's not determinate. It's always indeterminate, so it could spoil yoga at any moment, yoga being a flat line. And that is the fourth state of mind. Ekagra is a flat line. You've died. Your mind has died. And you hear about that in spiritual circles, go kill the Buddha, or may your mind expire, may you die on your pillow, the Zen Buddhists and so forth. You're talking about a mind that has just expired completely to thought. Thought being the father of the deed. See, all deeds started here. So that's called ekagra. And that fourth state of mind is leading to nirodha. So ekagra is going to be a flat line. Now, nirodha is a line that drops out. It's a line and then a space, line and then a space, line and then a space. So you're coming in and out of knowledge of, say, the last thing you remember, ego. Sweet ego. It's a station for you now. It's a satellite station where you can consciously drop in on. But now you know, and Patanjali explains it so well, what's going on in the mind of a Ramakrishna or in the consciousness of a Ramakrishna when people are always asking him in the 1800s, what was it like to go into Nirvikalpa, the Sampragyata? What was it like? And then he'd try to explain it and fall into it. Finally, one day he managed to get this much out. It's like a salt doll walking into an ocean to measure its depths. So here you're sort of let's call it a sugar doll to fit the analogy, you see. And you're going to walk into a big vat of honey, you see. So you're coming back to this sense of ego that's very refined and very peaceful, very blissful. It's really got everything it needs there in form. But that's the rub. It's got all it needs. It's got all it needs, you see. And it's enjoyed it as much as it wants to, you see. It's a mart of joy, Sri Ramakrishna said. This world is a mart of joy. Here I can eat, drink, and be merry. But put Ramakrishna side by side with a hedonistic person who is eating and drinking and making merry, and see one never goes into deep valleys, you see, or has vikshipta mind. Always has a ekagra mind at least, and then sometimes flat line, no mind, space, you see. While this other mind, this poor fool, is enjoying and glutting himself, and then he's going into all sorts of pain and suffering and cycles. So when Ramakrishna says, here I can eat, drink, and be merry, you must think that his sasmita samadhi, his sampragata samadhi, is available to him at all times when he comes out of a sampragata samadhi. Now that alone is a very shocking fact. There's not many people can ever come out of Nirvikalpa samadhi. You go into Nirvikalpa samadhi, it's like a moth just saw a bonfire. See? That's all she wrote. See, form is erased from your mind. You're going to your essence. The hailstone had a little trepidation, but then it fell into its own essence and merged. It's all merged. And that's the state of moksha that's ever at hand. Do we have to go back to show the chart? That's mukti, that's moksha. They're just returning to it after a self-actuated vacation from it, you see, a sojourn away from it, a sort of taking on of a dream of collective humanity in form, and then they can go back into a Sampajata Samadhi. So anyway, by this kind of process you can sort of understand in the Gospel of Ramakrishna that almost palpable thing you can taste, touch, see, hear, and smell with your subtle senses when you hear descriptions of Ramakrishna going into these different samadhis, which the priests and pundits of India didn't have names for, half of them. They'd come and say, oh, you've had this samadhi, you've had sthiti samadhi, you've had, Unmana samadhi, have you had jata samadhi? And he said, yes, but I've also had this samadhi, this samadhi. Wait a minute, that's not in my books. See, you fluster them. What'd you call that again? So, when you're having those kinds of experiences of all different kinds, then, of course, they're all going to dovetail into this state of formless reality called the Sampragyata. Non-dualism, Advaita, Shakta Advaita Vada. That's why these two pillars with their 3 sets of 2 are very important. Nirguna Saguna, Nirvikalpa Savikalpa, Sampragyata. You're talking about the same thing at 3 different periods of time in India, the way they explained it. So again, 4th state of mind, ekagra, flatline, but then nirodha happens, see, sometimes called niruddha. Then all of a sudden it gets line in a space, line in a space, line in a space, and maybe pretty soon just all space. No tone anymore. The tone has disappeared back into the great bell of Asampragata Samadhi. So, think about that, how a person will go through 5 states of mind on their way to realization. And then let's take these 10, look at these 10, as a process leading from seated samadhi to seedless samadhi. First, mind with gunas and nature present expands toward freedom. So, gunas, remember, rajas, tamas, sattva. Avarana, vikshepa, prakasha. I'll bring a chart about that next week. The covering power, the distorting power, and the revelatory power. Those are the 3 gunas. And so those are now still present in mind. And also nature is still present in mind. What kind of nature? Unmanifested prakriti, right there. Unmanifested prakriti. We have a nice chart on that about the iceberg, remember? The tip of the iceberg is manifested prakriti. Everything that's underneath the surface is unmanifested prakriti. They're all connected, you see. The form that you see here is just the tip of the iceberg compared to what's potential in nature. And nature can't do anything without consciousness to help it. It's just insentient. So that unmanifested prakriti, thought of form, and gunas are still there in that first state, the leaning towards seedlessness. The second point here, with rajas eliminated, intellect discriminates between matter and self. This is mixing in the Kaivalya principle now. Rajas means restlessness goes away. And any kind of frenetic activity of the mind, it's settling into a peace that passes all understanding. Somebody said to me at Thanksgiving dinner the other night, well, I'm leaving, I only have this to say, that God loves silence first and foremost. And I said, yes, that's true, but where do you find God nowadays? If he didn't want people to talk, he wouldn't have given us tongues. We've been talking for 2 hours about philosophy, you see. What else are we supposed to talk about when we talk? We use our tongue for. We can't speak about God. Holy Mother used to say, is God something that you can talk about like you would barter fish and greens in the marketplace? You can't talk about God. You only talk around it or at it. So that's what you have your tongue for. Why remain silent? Give out the teachings, share them with others. But you can give up this mindless talking of zeros that you engage in, social talk. It doesn't get you anywhere. And in fact, people go away and say, that was a fool I was just speaking to. But here they only go away and say, that was a madman I was talking to. There's something strange and wonderful about that madman. And that's how they felt about Ramakrishna and Ramana Maharshi and others they went to. So Rajas is eliminated. You get rid of that frenetic activity, even in its inception, and intellect begins to discriminate between matter and self. It's discriminated already between that, way back into the early limbs of yoga, but this kind of discrimination at the level of formlessness means I'm ready to give it up. That kind of discrimination back in the early stages was taking it on as a possibility. Can I give that up? Can I leave my body? Do I have fear? Do I have doubt? Does God really exist? Is matter really real or unreal? That's all early stuff, you see. But at this level of asampragata samadhi, you're courting not only just the possibility of giving it up, you're looking straight in the face of form, of the void of form. It's formlessness, and you're going to walk into it. Sort of like jumping off a steep cliff. It's against all your usual instincts, right? You can't even get up close to the edge of the cliff. The wind's blowing, you see. My dad got up to the edge of Grand Canyon before I was even born. My mother tells the story, and he was looking over, and this wind caught him in the back, almost pushed him over. So it's that kind of feeling. You're teetering on the brink of formless, but there's something very, very attracting to it, and you feel like that salt doll that wants to jump in, because maybe you can come out again and tell everyone what it was like. See? Mm-hmm. Of course, the salt doll melts into its own essence, and there's no one left to come out. That's the end of individual bliss. You see, but that's okay, because it doesn't interest you that much anymore. You've had it enough, and it's only just convenient to come back to it when you want to help humanity. Ramakrishna was just all bliss. Christ was all love. Buddha was all compassion. What do you think when you look at Ramakrishna? It's a bliss there. He's demonstrating to you bliss. Our founder used to say that all the time. He'd pray to all the great beings. He'd say, "Oh Lord Buddha, you are my compassion. Oh Lord Christ, you are my love." And he'd go through all the avatars. Oh Muhammad, you are my peace. Peace be upon him. And then he'd get to Ramakrishna, his own teacher. "Oh Ramakrishna, what can I say about you? You're my bliss." You see, you're just my ananda. So, that's Ramakrishna. So, Rajas is eliminated, and intellect begins to discriminate between mind, matter, and self at a very advanced stage. Okay, consciousness and unconsciousness, matter and mind, mind at a very refined state. The third bullet point there: the early stages of sampragata samadhi are encountered and attained. So you can see why I gave you the 5 states of mind, and Kaivalya last week, because all of this is kind of a difficult mixture to cite. He's done an admirable job of trying to put this in some sort of an order for us. But now you're seeing how a lot of this, some of it happens before others. It can't just be laid out on a graph like this and explained it like that, like anything else. We would like to see it straightforward. No, it's not going to happen, you see. It's too complex. Besides, you've got the human temperament to figure into it. Some of them will get these early, and some will get these later, and so forth. So there'll be different admixtures of this according to different temperaments: studious, contemplative, active, and devotional. 4 different kinds of temperaments. So, sampragata samadhi gets encountered and attained. The final level of sampragata samadhi brings about dharma mega samadhi. If you'll remember back with your photographic memory, please, to last week's chart, where I showed you that on Kaivalya, you'll see that was about the 4th or 5th level of that stages of attainment of Kaivalya was dharma mega samadhi. And after that, mala vinasha. You get rid of your imperfections, very subtle imperfections in your mind after you've had Dharma Mega Samadhi. Dharma Mega Samadhi means a rain cloud of virtues. Here's where you understand that all virtues exist inside of you, just like all knowledge lies inside of you, just like the Atman lies inside of you, just like the mother is inside of you. When you get the Dharma Mega Samadhi, it all comes raining down on you. And before it was a rain of, and now it's a rain of bliss. They hit the fan before, but now it's a cooling, welcome breeze, like a fan dipped in sandalwood, a sandalwood fan dipped in cool water and waved at you on a hot day, you see. Ramakrishna said. That's how beautiful and welcome that is, you see. Well, here's where Patanjali brings in one of his few mentions of Mother. He calls her Chit Shakti. Chit Shakti illumines the buddhi, which becomes stable and desireless. It's as if Mother stayed out of the whole picture, as she usually does, until a very advanced stage. And then Chit Shakti, the energy of wisdom, of higher thought, comes forward. She is the energy of wisdom. If you haven't realized that by now, I don't know what else I can say to convince you, you see. She's the mother of wisdom, the mother of the worlds, the divine mother of the universe, the primordial goddess. I can go on with English names, but I can give you 100 or 1,000 Sanskrit names for her, if you want. Somebody hand me the Sahasranam over there. So, Chit Shakti illumines the buddhi, means with rajas, that is restlessness, eliminated, and the intellect in a fine state of discrimination, and Sampragata Samadhi all had encountered and attained, then she comes and illumines the field, the mind field. And Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha happens. The cessation of the mind's waves, and then a Sampragata Samadhi starts to dawn. Getting exciting, isn't it, here? Let's go on. The triple gunas of Prakriti get duly dissolved back into their origin. Now, I've given the teaching several times that the gunas are there at the beginning of inception of all form. They are in equilibrium, and when it's time for a cycle of creation to come forth, they're kicked into disequilibrium. And according to Vedantic philosophy and others, Samkhya and so forth, that's the beginning of the whole shooting match. That's where the whole dream begins. So the gunas then are at the very inception of a cycle, so they're going to wait to the very end to go away. They're going to be at the end of the elimination of all cycles of thought. Remember, talking about things like buddhi, intelligence, Chit Shakti, you're talking about mind at a very refined level. Very refined level. A pure mind. Chit Shuddhi. Chit Shakti, Chit Shuddhi. Might as well be the same thing. Now, these gunas begin to get dissolved, and the mind is, it's another way of saying, Koivalya, I think I'm going to give up nature, so, I really can't give up nature, can I, till I give up the gunas. Because form really started with them. You see, and nature just kind of came along and accommodated them. See. So gunas have to go, those modes of nature that are in nature. And then the dissolution of sattva guna, that's the highest of the gunas, means balance. When balance gets dissolved even, or the desire for balance, it brings about a sampragata samadhi. So you can see then why he explains the end of bliss, where rolls the stream of knowledge, truth, and the bliss that follows both. Knowledge, then you find this bliss kicking in, but then you find it giving out. And then truth dawns in the mind, truth in the form of a sampragata samadhi. Purusha now controls the mind's activities and is free from samsara. So the soul is in charge now. Purusha, the indweller in the city of 9 gates, Purusha, you see, is now in control of the whole shoot and match. And attachment to matter ceases, but the intellect still conducts relations with matter and spirit. So now everything has been given over to the soul, and it will retain form if it so desires, that's Jivan Mukta. Or it will give up form if it so desires, that's Videha Mukti. It will give up all bodies and get into formless freedom, Videha Mukti. Or it will retain the form and come back into it to help others. Bodhisattva kind of idea in Buddhism, what we call Jivan Mukta or Jivan Mukti. Finally, the yogi interacts with the world, but the chit shakti within abides calmly despite all appearances. So, again, you really have no other better example than Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa when Mother Kali got a hold of him. Because he was gone. There was hardly a semblance of Ramakrishna left. It was all Kali in him. It was all he said. The last thing he said when he passed from the body was Kali 3 times. So basically everything was Kali to him. See, everything had become the Chit Shakti. She took over and he was gone. And that's because she favored him so highly, and that's because he had the right idea. To stride boldly into formlessness without any fear and doubt, and to give up all traces of ego, and to have the ultimate experience in spiritual life, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or Seedless Samadhi. Keshav Chandra Sen was the famous figure in Bengal at the time. Ramakrishna was not known very much. But Keshav Chandra Sen always went to Ramakrishna, because he loved Ramakrishna and wanted to hear him speak. So once Keshav said to Thakur, means the Lord, Sri Ramakrishna, said to him, I want to go into the deepest samadhi, formless samadhi, dive into the ocean of samadhi, swim to the other shore, and never come back again. And Ramakrishna said, don't say that. Yes, Keshav, dive in, have formless samadhi, but come back and help others. Swim to the other shore, see what's there, but always come back and help others. Ramakrishna used to say, there are 2 kinds of Paramahamsas. One hides behind a screen and eats mangoes. The other brings the mangoes out and wants to share them with you. And both of these Paramahamsas are very high beings, no doubt. But they're just of different temperaments, different natures, for different reasons. Takes all kinds, right? So spiritual life's no different. Ramakrishna was the kind that liked to share with others. So he was here to, as almost the public avatar. See? I'm here for everyone. Think of me what you will, say of me what you will. So Vivekananda later said, you can think of Ramakrishna anyway. You can think of him as just a spiritual man, a divine being, a sage, a seer. You can think of him as an avatar, a divine incarnation of Kali. But just think of him. Just think of him. I've been doing it for over 40 years now. You talk about alambanas and things to meditate on. Ramakrishna has been my alambana for 40 years, along with his divine consort, Holy Mother. So, and their mantra has been in my mind, you see, as given to me by my guru, who was her last living monastic disciple. So this line of teachings comes through that line of realized souls. Yoga is a part of it. And next week we will be getting into Ashtaka and Nashtaka. I'll show you the systems in India, Vedanta being one of them, Yoga being another, and how they are to be not compared, but to be integrated, that each one opened the way for the next in a line of succession in history, from the very earliest to the most recent. Now let's read the final quote here. When the mind field expands to know the underlying principles which support it, that is called vitarka. Okay. Savitarka and savitarka and nirvitarka. So now he's defining this. Who's defining this? The father of Vedanta. Beautiful thing about father of yoga is that the father of Vedanta, Vedavyas, came along at the later century and took the yoga system and made comments on it. A beautiful way the Vedavyas commented on Patanjali's yoga. Also a beautiful way Shankara commentated on Patanjali's yoga. So everyone was very fascinated with that 8-limb system, and of the more recent being, from 700 AD onwards, or 140 AD, which is supposed to be when Patanjali lived, onwards. And that yoga system was very much flavored with Buddhism. Patanjali must have loved Buddhism very much. Buddha lived 550 BC, and Patanjali around 100 AD, they say. So you could see the whole thing just connected like that. Not at all antagonistic of each other, always complementary of each other, and adding on constantly according to the time and the needs, right down to the present time. So that's what means here by to know the underlying principles which support it. That's called vitarka. Underlying principles are air, earth, fire, water, ether, tasting, hearing, touching, smelling, seeing. Those are the underlying principles of consciousness. They come from consciousness. The power of your eyes to see comes from the consciousness of your mind, not from nature. Nature can produce fleshy orbs. It can't produce consciousness. Get it? Consciousness is its own. It is conscious. It is sentient. It is sentiency with a capital S. Not subject to birth and death. What's happening in nature? Oh, birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. What's happening in Atman? Absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. Nothing that has anything to do with pleasure and pain. Nothing that has anything to do with good and bad. Nothing that has anything to do with life and death. Nothing that has anything to do with the pairs of opposites. It's non-dual. Read my lists. Their lists, really, but I'm helping them compile them here. Now, I didn't get more than a sentence out, did I? Sorry, Vedavyas. Let's try this again. When the mind field expands to know the underlying principles which support it, that is called vitarka, air, earth, fire, water, and ether, and so forth. When it seeks a more refined expansion in order to comprehend the subtle supports behind appearances, that is known as vichara. Oh, what are the more refined things? See. Now you're talking about the avisheshas. You're talking about subtle elements, tanmatras, things like that. See. When bliss is experienced upon knowing the gross and the subtle, that is called ananda, sattvic joy. So now you've actually known the gross, known the subtle, because you have bodies, that is the external and the internal, world and mind, matter and mind, you might say. You've known those two now, but now you're going towards a state that's called not gross, not subtle, but causal. Karana. Karana means causal. Sukshma means subtle. And so you're going from the gross to the subtle to the causal, and now you're meditating on such things as the ego. Because that actually caused your embodiment, in a sense. In other words, when you decided to become a separate self, that's when you took an ego. Otherwise, you would have just stayed one with Brahman. Some light sucked you out of the ocean and turned you into a drop of rain. See? Sucked you up into the sky of awareness, and you became a crystallized being, you see. And your ego was necessary for that. You did that. No one did that to you, God nor devil. You did that. You can undo it too, in the most wonderful of ways. Now he's given us those three. When the mind expands to know the underlying principles, when it expands to know the subtle supports, now when it expands to know bliss, and finally when evidence of a unified self occurs which allows the removal of all distinctions, that is known as ashmita. You begin to contemplate the loss of your ego, the disappearance of your assumed self. And you read in the Gospel of Ramakrishna him doing that all the time. He would come back out of the Samadhi, and he would look at the people sitting there, including Naren, his favorite young man, student. He'd say, "What was your name again?" totally lost to the ego, inside of himself and outside, you see. So coming out, he had to get back into the sense of separate self, remember souls and names and forms and so forth. Sometimes he would say, "Bring me a glass of water." And he'd come out of Samadhi and say, "Oh, Mother, what are all these people doing here? Who are they? Why are they looking at me?" And then some sort of semblance of the situation would dawn. He said, "Bring me a glass of water." And he'd go, "Oh yes, I'm in the realm of the 5 elements." So he would, because he had meditated on air, earth, fire, water, and ether, he didn't just take them for granted, like all of humanity does. Oh, here we are, sporting, having fun with our egos amongst the 5 elements. There's no meaning to it, there's no purpose to it, there's no origin to it, there's an end to it when I die. Let's have fun while we can, you see. No. He knew the constituents, the makeup of the universe, what to speak of the subtle universe, what to speak of the causal universe, what to speak of a sampragyata samadhi, beyond all name and form. He had been into it, immersed himself in it. He used to say that, dip your mind like a towel into the ocean of Satchidananda until it becomes saturated and drenched and completely malleable and under your control. So this is what happens. This is how the father of yoga is describing a Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa before Ramakrishna even showed up. Because Ramakrishna had happened before. Why do you think he was named Rama and Krishna? The same being. Near and ask him on his deathbed, although Paramahamsa never dies, he actually thought in his mind, if this man thinks right now, if he tells me that he's an avatar, then I will believe him. And the thought was picked right out of his mind, and Ramakrishna turned his head and said, he who is Rama and he who is Krishna is now here in this body as Ramakrishna. And not just in your Vedantic sense, that is not just philosophically. This is the actual return, as it were, as if it ever left, of this divine consciousness which is in all of us, the Paramatman. Let's celebrate that. See, there's the reason for your joy, if anything. Your bliss is to celebrate that. What are you celebrating? Good food at Thanksgiving? A couple kegs of beer brought by some fraternity frats or something? College frats? Are those things to celebrate? Or is the bliss of your divine nature something to stand up, acknowledge, and celebrate? See? That you're eternal. So when evidence of a unified ego occurs, that's the removal of all distinctions. That's known as Ashmita. So that is the gateway, or Sasmita. You'd say it either way. Ashmita just means sense of ego. So with ego, Sashmita. When that disappears, then this whole process is underway, and one, as Vedavyas says here, makes acquaintance with one's true self, maybe for the first time in that lifetime. Of course, makes acquaintance with that self in that lifetime is very, very unlikely you're going to forget it in the next lifetime. You've pretty much gone beyond the gunas, gone beyond nature, seen your true nature. If you ever come back again, you'll come back as a living, liberated soul. What's that called?
Jivan.
He beat you all. I knew he would. Jivan Mukta. Jivan Mukti is the actual thing itself. Jivan Mukta is the being. So the Jivan Mukta has Jivan Mukti. All right, so we have looked at Sasmita, Sampragyata and Asampragyata, and remember I'm mating them up with Vedanta's versions, Nirvikalpa, Savikalpa, because Vikalpa again means imaginings in time, Nir means extinct. So all your imaginings in time have been made extinct. You don't go there anymore to form. You're in an unexplainable state of pure conscious awareness, a homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness. And there's no second thing to explain it. See, there never has been. The salt doll never came out from the ocean and said, "Oh, guess I plumbed its depths. I know how deep it is." No, nobody ever did that. You see, It can't be done. And if you're in a state of savikalpa, then you're with vikalpas. You're still having sankalpas and vikalpas going on. You know what those words mean, right? So you're still engaging in thought processes called projections, vikalpas. Vikalpas are with desire, sankalpas are of all sorts of design. You can get together with a bunch of other mind souls and create a world called ancestors, or create a world called earth, or heaven, or even hell. The 7 lower lands are called patalas, or sunken grounds. Those are hell beings, hell realms. They're all in the mind too. You won't find them located geographically somewhere. Have you found heaven up there? So these are in the minds of human beings, just like everything else is in the mind. In the remaining time, which is about 20 minutes, let's look then towards this new chart. We will broach it, at least, this time. But we probably won't be able to come anywhere near finishing it, but this will give you a good taste of next week's class. And it's a new chart that none of you have seen yet, Astika and Nastika. Now that's what's on these 2 pillars. Astika really pretty means traditional, and Nastika means non-traditional. And in India, there's no rub against either of them. Astika, if it's orthodox, means it's taking the Vedas as its authority. Vedas and Upanishads. Sorry, Mother, we'll have to come back to you. Vedas and Upanishads are its authority. But if it's Nastika, then it doesn't necessarily take Vedas and Upanishads for its authority. It doesn't mean that it doesn't believe in them. The Vedas and Upanishads are renowned over all of India. Everyone admires them, follows them. It just means that at the particular time Buddha was living, about 550 years BC, the Vedas were not in a very good state of transmission. They weren't being taught. They had become, the teachers around them, teachings around them had become crystallized. So he came up with the 4 Noble Truths. He came up with Praticca Samutpata. He came up with the 12 Nidanas that connect you back to your past lifetimes. Those are all Vedantic. It's not like he was coming up with anything new. They were just his particular formation at that time, just like this was Patanjali's formation at the time of yoga that we looked at, the different samadhis. So Astika and Nastika. Astika is all the traditional or orthodox systems. Here's a quote. Basically, everyone has borrowed from Mother India throughout long phases of time, as there has been an endless sweep of religions, philosophies, and pathways emanating from her. In other words, not just one sacred book and a single prophet or avatar, but many, many of each. And within this plethora of spiritual avenues, there has always been room for those who profess the existence of divine reality, as well as for those who do not care to either admit it or emphasize it. So we just looked into the samadhis of yoga, right? The first half of the class and part of this half, didn't we? Did he mention God ever? Yoga mentioned Chit Shakti once or twice, infers the existence of God, but Patanjali really was leaving it up to you. In fact, the statement about yoga is that anyone can enter into it, whether they're believers or non-believers. They will just do the yoga, and then they will come upon their own conception of what reality is. Call it God, or call it something else. Call it by any name you wish, or don't call it by a name at all. You know the famous disciple-teacher conversation that was had with Lord Buddha, when one of his disciples came up and said, "So you've been talking all about these truths of India. Is there a God then?" And Buddha said, "Did I say there was a God?" And then the student asked, "Well, then there is no God?" And Buddha said, "Did I say there was no God?" Totally non-committal. And that's the point around Astika and Nastika that I'm making. somewhat emphasizing here is that they're neither antagonistic of each other, nor are they trying to outdo each other. They're complementary of each other, and they're happening at different stages of the game of time, a game of time, in kalpas, in yugas, and so forth. And not only that, some of them profess belief or faith in a divine reality, and some of them don't. They just don't mention it. They're just there to hand you out the Dharmic teachings, to show you what India has been up to ever since the earliest souls were born there. Always coming from the station of nonviolence. Now there you see Astika on one side and Astika on the other. Astika admit the existence of God, basically, but notice I have an asterisk around Samkhya because he was another one. He gave us the 24 cosmic principles. He gave us the complacencies, and he gave us the various systems of Samkhya Yoga that were followed by almost every other philosophy that came after. Everyone borrowed from Lord Kapila. But I put an asterisk there because you really can't find any mention of God in the Tattva Samasa Sutras and others, few sutras that are still left that are attributed to his authorship. There are very few Samkhya scriptures left. They're gone. Too bad. So, but those that are there, no. It's just pretty much statement of fact, reading of the cosmological order of things in the universe. Why do you think everyone went to town on it? You see, everything we just studied from yoga was borrowed from Lord Kapila's 24 cosmic principles. How could you meditate on air, earth, fire, water, and ether, tasting, hearing, touching, smelling, and seeing, the 5 subtle senses and the 5 tanmatras, 20 in all, if Kapila hadn't have come along and compiled them for you centuries earlier? You see, where would your system be then? So everyone borrowed from that great man's homework. He was the first one that stood up and said, here's what your universe consists of: outer, inner, and causal. 3 worlds, and basically those 24 components. Kashmiri Shaivism got so inspired by that they added another 12 on top finally. So then they had 36 cosmic principles. And those are all beautiful study. But could they have done that without this foundation that Kapila laid for everyone to come? So you go to India and say, Kapila. 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 If they even hear a whisper of the great man's word, there's a salute, because everyone knows he handed out this early, very, very early system of divine cosmology. So I'm just jumping to him because I put an asterisk there because he's under the Astika systems, but you don't hear him mentioning God, existence of God. So there you see they're called the Shat Darshanas, the 6 darshanas of India. They're famous. You probably haven't heard of 3 of them, but the other 3 are still around, especially 2 of them. Of course, Yoga of Patanjali, which we just looked at, that's one of them. And Samkhya of Kapila, which I just mentioned. If you're into Indian philosophy, if you haven't heard specifically of Lord Kapila and Samkhya philosophy, doesn't matter, you're studying it all the time. When you look at Buddhism, Vedanta, Yoga, and other darshanas, it's there. A lot of the makeup is there. Then there's the Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini. That's the great man who authored that system. Then Uttara Mimamsa of Vedavyas. What's that? The classical name for Vedanta. So Uttara Mimamsa, and there's Vedavyas, whose quote we just read on that last chart. Then Nyaya of Gautama. Nyaya. See, they thumb their nose at everyone. A lot of these proofs of existence have been given to us by Nyaya and by Vaisheshika of Kannada. The Vaisheshika system is very profound, and there's still elements of both Nyaya and Vaisheshika in many of these, in the Vedantas still. It's like two or three of these philosophies took from the other three and borrowed the best parts of them and kept them going, extant throughout the whole warp of time. So, like I said, three of these you probably have heard of: Samkhya, Vedanta, and Yoga. The other three, maybe not, I've heard of them. But those are the 6 orthodox systems of India that go back thousands of years BC. Some of them, the earliest ones. Now, if you look at Nastika, non-orthodox system means non-committal as to the existence of God. I was looking for a word to explain it, and I thought, not disbelievers or non-believers, because that wouldn't quite cut it. That's why we have the difference between agnostics and atheists. So, one doesn't believe and one hasn't decided yet. So in the same way here, you have this idea of non-committal as to the existence of God. They don't say one way or the other. My feeling is that they all believe in God, but they just don't want to give it a name. And you can see that, what to speak of 6 orthodox systems, you can also see it in the 6 or 7 main religions of the world. Judaism didn't care to put a name on it. Muslim religion didn't care to put a name on it. India ran to put as many names on as it possibly could. But wanted you to know that those were all relative, saguna, and there's one nirguna. So no matter what path you take, you'll find that, I think Ramakrishna put it best in this day and age. God is with form, God is beyond form, and God is beyond both form and formlessness as well. I think that pretty much covers it right there. That you cannot conceive of Brahman, is the word that Vedanta uses, or Satchidananda if you prefer. You can't conceive of it, but there it is. You can't deny conceptualism either. You can't deny concept happening from Lord Brahma all the way down to Lord Vishnu and passing on to Lord Shiva. You see the Trinity right there. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. That's where all conceptualism really begins at the cosmic level, in these 3 great minds. Now, looking at Nastika, these 2 you would probably put in there: Buddhism of Lord Buddha and Jainism of the Tirthankaras and Mahavir. Mahavir was the most recent Tirthankara, and he was, before Christ. So Jainism really claims a very ancient heritage. If you have 24 Tirthankaras and Jainism was not yet born before Christ, then it must stretch back for a lot of generations, Jainism, way back into India's ancient past. So I'll have a chart on the non-violence of Jainism that I'll show you maybe next week. I was going to bring it and put it up, but we don't have time. So you'll look at the most non-violent religion in the world, Jainism, the most sensitive and careful. Sometimes you see them, masks over their face. They don't even want to kill an insect or anything. So Buddhism, yes, quite non-violent, but Jainism, extremely so, as some people would say. But when you look at the teachings that I've actually learned from Swami Brahmeshananda of India, who has written and studied Jainism, he's a Ramakrishna order Swami, he has this long study and about 16, 17, 18 different articles. I'm putting them in each issue of the journal as we go along. You'll find some very beautiful teachings on Jainism, why it's not just an extreme nonviolence, but there's a whole set of rules and regulations you follow that really just cut down your karma. It's not so much a moral, thou shalt not kill or not commit violence, but there's a lot more to it than that. So it's not wise, of course, to judge something just from the outside. So I'll bring that chart along and you can see it soon. Now, we should look at the scriptures by classification in a sort of order. Oh, the reason I put this up, by the way, was when we get to Vedanta, this darshana, Uttaramimamsa, of Vedavyas, Vedanta means, Veda Anta, right? Vedas, 4 of them. Anta, the end of the 4 Vedas. That doesn't mean let's get rid of the 4 Vedas. It means the Upanishads are at the end. So Vedanta really means the end of the Upanishad, the end of the Vedas, which is the Upanishads. And here's what's left of the Upanishads after the passage of time. There must have been maybe hundreds and thousands of them I'd sure like to see them. What a treasure trove that would be if you could somehow bring them back. But it's eternal, right? So they're always there. They've gone back to unmanifested Prakriti. And they'll come forth again at some time in the mind of some great seer. So the 108 Upanishads is there. There you see the 4 Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva. And there you see the Upanishads that fall into each of those 4 Vedas. This one having 2 subdivisions. So you can look there and find these 108 Upanishads, which are the Vedanta. This is the, and we know because we have them here for you to read, that there's beautiful, beautiful testaments. Some of them you could read in 10 minutes. It's not like you have to break your mind, broke the mouth, as they say in Hawaii. Don't break the mind on the Upanishads. Some of them are very easy reads, like the Mandukya Upanishad, 12 slokas all on the word. Beautiful, trimmed down if you want to know about the word. Om. But there you see also underlined the 10 or 11 of them that Shankara commented on at 700 AD. So they're the more accepted ones as far as being major Upanishads. Those 10 or 11, he actually sat down, read, commented on them, and those commentaries are famous. Just like his teacher's teacher commented on Mandukya Upanishad, became the most famous philosophical treatises in existence. Both Easterners and Westerners lauded it. It's all about non-duality, Advaita. So usually it attends the end of the Mandukya Upanishad. So you get 12 slokas there, and you think, oh, I'm done. But then you get Gaudapada's commentary at the end. I'm not done. And I'm glad I'm not done. This is beautiful. And he gives you 3 or 4 prakarnas, sections on the commentary on all those 12 slokas. It's like philosophical poetry. It's perfection. We sometimes go into retreat with it. In fact, we are going into retreat with it next year in spring, if you'd like to absorb Gaudapada's Karika with us. I want to read, because we're coming to an end, so at least we've done orthodox and non-orthodox systems, so you can see what we talk about when we talk about India's darshanas. Darshana means clear seeing, a way of clear seeing. So darshana is a way that opens up the human mind to its spiritual potential. And so we will take that deeper next week. But for now, let me close with that quote at the top of that by Vivekananda. It says, "Sober-minded people have become disgusted with their superstitious religions and are looking to India for new light. How eagerly they take in any little bit of the grand thoughts of the holy Vedas, which resist and are unharmed by the terrible onslaughts of modern science. The theories of creation out of nothing, a created soul, and a big tyrant of a god sitting on a throne in a place called heaven, and of eternal hellfires have disgusted the educated, and the noble thoughts of the Vedas about the eternity of creation and the soul they are absorbing. They are imbibing fast in one shape or another." And of course the most definitive shape of that is Advaita. That's non-duality. That pretty much is covering all of these. There's an Advaitic thread running through all of these darshanas. And that's what we're sort of getting at in this series of classes. Please join us next week and the following week and the following week for 3 more classes of Advaita Vedanta. No, 2 more Sundays of Advaita Vedanta sadhana. Shakta Advaita Vedanta sadhana. And then a break around Christmas, and then another set of classes on the rest of this chart that we will get to, which has all the cosmology to it. We're sort of taking her from the crown of her head on down to 7 chakras. And if you're talking about the kundalini of all kundalinis, that's a very profound thing to do. So please join us, be with us for that process, or watch it live stream, or look back on it. If you can't make the classes, they will be stored and turned into series on YouTube, what we're doing. And you can also write in your questions direct to SRV and its spiritual director, yours truly, and come to our retreats and so forth to learn more about these. That's why we're here, to educate and this is one of our bylaws as a non-profit organization, to educate especially the Western people in the philosophical profundity of India's great systems, Vedanta, Yoga, Samkhya, Buddhism, so forth and so on. So please join us for that again and again. Dip your mind over and over again in that ocean of teachings until it becomes completely saturated with them, and all your problems and sufferings and karmas will be disintegrated. So let's end here with the chant. Om Sato, Om Sato Ma Satgamoya, Damaso Ma Joitir Gamoya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abira Bira Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinamukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with your sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.